I'm Angelica and this is my husband.
I'm Chris.
And welcome to the Skag Den. So we are at a little bit of a lull in making our bus right at the moment. So I figured I would take this opportunity to kind of go over how exactly we got our bus and some things to look for whenever you plan on getting your own bus. So I have my little thing of notes here. So how we actually found our bus, I ended up searching around online for a while and came across this website called govdeals.com. It's where you can get things at auction. There's a lot of government issued like police vehicles, ambulances, buses,
military stuff.
Yeah,
sometimes.
military stuff. There's all kinds of neat things on there, and you can look it up by location. So I was just on that website pretty much every single day looking at school buses and trying to find any that were in our area. And I came across a school bus on there and ended up placing a bid on it. And I want to talk a bit about how GovDeals works. So you can place your bid, and it has actual like auction end date. So if it's going to end, at the end of the month, you have 20 days until the auction ends or whatever. So it's nice to know. And you also can do an auto bid function, where you can set the limit of how high you're willing to bid, and then you can lower your bid to the minimum bid or higher, because I think the minimum bid is like $1 or something like that.
Basically, get you back on top.
Yeah, so basically you can auto bid, let's say, because whenever I first found this bus, I was only willing to go up to 1,000 on it, and once it got to 1,000, I wasn't going to bid any more on it. So I set my auto bid to go to 1,000, but I would do that in increments sometimes. So I would set it at like up to 500, and then anytime someone outbids you, it automatically outbids them by the minimum bid amount, which is really nice. So I never had to worry about, oh God, I'm going to be outbid, because unless someone was going to outbid the maximum that I was willing to pay, it was pretty much a surefire thing. So obviously other people can do that too, and for a while it was starting to freak me out, and it started getting up to a little bit closer than what I was wanting to spend, and I began looking at a different bus and placed a bid on that, and then I ended up having 2 bids on 2 different buses, and I was actually in the lead on the first one that I bid on, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to end up having 2 different buses. And then luckily someone outbid me on the first one, and this is actually the second bus that I bid upon that we ended up getting. So they were about the same year, same amount of mileage pretty much. I think the first one that I bid on had lower miles, but they were both from the same schoolyard and everything. Yeah. But we basically found it in Douglas County, which was only about 30 miles from where we were, which was really nice. And we were able to go take a look at it, actually speak with some of the mechanics that usually worked on it, and actually kind of test drive it around the parking lot, which was really nice to be able to do. And we got our bill of sale and our title from doing that as well. I ended up winning this bus off of that GovDeals for $850, and then with taxes I think it came out to like $965. So I actually got this bus for a pretty good deal. It's a 1993 Bluebird TC 2000, yeah. So that is what our bus is here, and so far so good. I mean, we've had the bus almost a year now. Yeah. And I mean, it's been kind of a slow going process, as you can tell, but
which we did get lucky with this one. Basically with this, because it was the auction bus, basically it wasn't in the main fleet of buses anymore. They had taken it out of commission, or out of rotation, and so they were starting to just barely take some parts off it. Like they took the mirrors to put on a different bus that had broken mirrors. They took pieces of the seat belt to put on a different bus. So be aware that if you're buying something from an auction, if it's coming from a county, it should work. It should be in decent condition. They maintain things so that the kids are safe. just be aware there may be a little bit of work to do. Ours, luckily, I want to say they put a new starter on it and a new not an injection pump, but a priming pump for the diesel. So we got a few little goodies there, but overall it was in well-maintained shape.
Yeah, and so like I said, we were actually able to talk with the mechanics that worked on it, which was really nice, like he said, to be able to find out what all they did, find out the history of it, if there had been any major problems, any accidents or anything weird like that. And then we ended up hiring a friend of ours who happened to have a CDL, and he drove out with us to get the bus, and of course we got there and then forgot the school bus keys at our house, which is again 30 miles away. So you left it, and I had to end up driving back, and it was just like this whole ordeal. But anyway, so we ended up hiring our friend with a CDL because we could have honestly driven it over to our place of where we were going to keep it, but just for the simple fact that if state troopers were on the road and they wanted to pull us over for it being an older vehicle and just a school bus, we wanted to be prepared for that. And I'll talk a little bit more in a different video of how we were able to get the bus insured and actually titled and everything else as a motorhome, because we had to do that before we moved from Colorado to Tennessee. So another thing that I wanted to talk about was what to look for as far as getting a bus. So obviously whatever bus you're going to get is up to you of what you're looking for. But standard things I'll have him mostly talk about since he works on mechanics. But here are some things to look for. So tire tread depth / tire age, if you want to talk a little bit more about that. I mean, there's not a whole lot to.
Yeah, I mean, and again, if you're buying it at an auction, you're not really going to be able to look at this kind of stuff ahead of time. So be aware of that too. Like I said, if you get it from a county or, most places anymore, they have to maintain the vehicles to a certain spec to make sure they're safe for the road. They can't just slack most of the time. But if you do end up looking at it first before you buy it at an auction, there is quite a few things you can check to see the overall health. Make sure you're not going to, have an uh-oh moment sometime down the road, or just surprises along the way, because we all know that surprises are, they can be good, but most of the time.
Whenever you're about to move halfway across the country and then one of your hoses dry rots and you have to replace it.
Yeah, some of that.
Literally the day before you're going to leave to go across country.
Yeah. So, like she said, tire tread is a good one. This is mostly because if you do end up having to buy tires on a school bus, they're not full-on semi-tires, but they are not cheap either. You'll probably at least be spending about $1,000 at least. We were fortunate with ours. We actually went to GCR in Commerce City, and we talked to Martin, which he really hooked us up. He had some used tires. If you guys are ever in Colorado, definitely get with GCR there.
Yeah, and they also offer financing, so we ended up getting a card. And I don't know if it's like this all the time, but for the first 6 months you have 0% financing, which we were like, heck yeah, let's jump on that as soon as possible. That way, we can pay a little at a time instead of $1,000 right out of your pocket right then and there. Because
that all hurts.
Yeah, because our tires, it wasn't necessarily the tread on them that needed to be replaced. It was more so the age of the tire was getting pretty up there.
Which we had read, everywhere we found online said that 5 years is as old as you can run a commercial tire. But what we were actually told, and what makes more sense, is actually 7 to 10 years. 10 years is at the point where you're potentially risking a blowout, but more so the Department of Transportation will actually give you trouble for having a tire older than 10 years on a heavy duty vehicle or school bus, semi truck. But past 10 years you probably don't want to risk it anyway. This is your whole house. It's worth the investment. But next big thing that's going to really, if nothing else, just add time to your build is rust on the chassis and frame. Basically, we bought this at auction, but had I got the chance before time, you know, you can look up under the bus, make sure that there's not a whole lot of rust on the frame. Obviously, the frame is an important part, but also just on the, there's supports that run this way on the bus. We're sitting, the engine's here, back of the bus is that way. We have runners that go across this way. You can see potentially rusty spots from underneath, and then there was quite a few bits where we had to take out in the middle and actually cut and weld new pieces in.
But we weren't able to tell that really until we took the floor out. But this is more so if you're going to look at a bus at whatever location, or like whenever we bought ours, we were lucky enough to actually go take a look before we took it off the lot. I mean, it was already paid for and everything, but we were kind of able to see, you know, if you have a chance, I guess is what I'm saying, to look at your bus before you actually buy it. These are some things to look for, is like try to get under there, see if you notice any rust on the underside of the frame or anything like that. And
then next thing is pretty important, obviously, because if you don't have it, you're not going anywhere, but your engine. If you can, try to look at it, at least inspect it. Sometimes you'll see that people have, you know, power washed it, try to make it look nice for sale. And you may unfortunately not see it at times, but check for leaks. Engine oil leaks are a pain, especially on something like this. You know, it can add up in cost. You know, most bigger diesel engines take at least 3 gallons of oil. So yeah, you have time to potentially not address it. But if you're putting a gallon in every couple months, then it'll add up. It'll be really obnoxious. And wherever you park it, you know, obviously if you're parking in a national park, that's kind of bad practice to get into, is just leaking all over the ground. But while you're looking at the engine, a good practice too is also look at all your hoses, you know, coolant lines, any rubber hoses that are near your engine. Basically, if you just give them a squeeze, see how it sounds. Some ways that you'll be able to tell is just if it is really hardened by heat and cracks, or makes a bunch of noise when you squeeze it. If it's not really pliable, typically you're about to have a hose break. We were lucky with this one. Again, we didn't have any breaks up that day, but we did bypass all our coolant lines that run to the heaters in here. And then there was all the heat shielding, which is basically like a pool floaty that sits around it. All of that just crumbled off on the drive here, so, or on the drive to where we were working on it. But if you feel any of those hoses start to crack and break, you know, just know that you're probably going to be replacing a decent amount of them. And remember too that some of these hoses, depending on your engine orientation, could run the whole length of the bus. Like our fuel line that went bad, it got hot, dry rotted, and got heat damaged. So we should have run a whole new hose from the front of the bus to where our tank is behind the back axles, which is 30 feet-ish. So, you know, just keep in mind extra costs. It's something you could probably address down the road. But another important thing about the engine is if you get a chance to look at it, take your radiator cap off. And if you have the ability to, start the engine. Most of the time it's not an issue, but that's how you can diagnose a broken head gasket fairly easily sometimes, is if you start the engine and it starts spitting coolant out of the radiator. Basically the engine is just taking all that pressure and blowing it out the side into the coolant reservoir and passages. So, you know, that'll be an immediate cost. So if it does that, absolutely try to stay clear if you can. The batteries is the next fairly important one, just because it's a big expense. If you end up buying new batteries, you know, you can cheap them out, but with diesels, typically you want to get a decent battery. Reason is that a good battery will actually hold the charge to start it in the cold, and the worst time to not be able to start a diesel is in the cold, especially when your house is stuck somewhere. But if you look at the batteries themselves, just make sure they're square, make sure they, you know, have the shape they should. If you notice, you know, on a side that should be straight, you see it kind of bubble out. Basically what that is it lost its charge and froze, and then the battery, you know, expanded when it froze, and then those walls just never really came back to square. So just keep in mind that may be an added expense you're going to be dealing with. Obviously on a lot of this stuff, you're probably going to see, if it's been sitting for any amount of time, you're going to see rat droppings and animal leavings. But while you're checking your batteries, make sure that nothing's been eating on your electrical cables, because that's another thing that adds up fairly quickly. You know, some things your battery cables won't run very far for, but if you do, again, have to run, you know, all the way from the back of the bus to the front of the bus, that's a lot of cable. It's going to add up really quick, and especially if you have to have somebody do it for you, then it's really going to add up. And then another thing with the engine while we're on it is, you know, mileage and runtime. Our bus has 220 some thousand miles on it, which some may say is a lot, and it's got its, you know, use out of it for sure, and that's why the county was getting rid of it. But basically, if you have an old diesel engine, even a lot of newer diesel engines are really good. They just keep on chugging. Ours could potentially go probably twice what it is right now. We'll have to see how many miles we end up putting on it. I mean, there's a lot of world out there to see, and you know.
How many miles does ours have?
Our truck?
Our bus.
220 something.
Oh, okay.
I can check. I can't see from here. There's a glare. But you know, mileage is important, but more of the time when you're running, or when you buy a bus from the city or county in like a city or a small town, you're gonna see more runtime than mileage, so your mileage is gonna be kind of inaccurate. It's not as relevant, because a lot of times they'll start them up in the morning, let them warm up. You know, you'll be running real slow, stopping at a stop to pick up all the kids, and then they'll probably idle at the school while they're waiting for the next run.
Sorry about the chickens.
Yeah, the chickens are just going nuts right now. But while we're still on it, the engine and transmission type, basically, you know, there's any more. It's hard to go wrong on most diesels. If you're really looking for a suggestion, you know, anything with a Cummins in it, anything with a Caterpillar, even old Caterpillar engines are really good.
And he's actually worked at Caterpillar on like their heavy equipment, so he knows about how decent they can actually run. And
if you find a Detroit diesels are in a lot of like medium duty trucks and some heavy duty trucks still. But I know for a fact, like Rolling Vistas, their bus has a DT466, and that's basically what's in almost 90% of, or not 90%, but a decent amount of like box trucks, moving trucks. So if you ever did need to find parts, they're still on the shelf. You wouldn't have to get some special ordered, something or other. But if you also need a recommendation, I would lean, if you're inexperienced mechanically, I would lean towards the mechanical diesels, you know, older. The electronic stuff is really nice and it does run really well, but you know, anytime you complicate a system more than it was, it's just one more thing that could potentially go wrong. And not that I'm saying it's unreliable, but if you want something that's gonna start every single time you crank it and nothing's gonna change until you do something to it, or something else does something to it, a mechanical diesel is gonna pretty much do that. We have the same engine as our bus in our truck, and it's really nice, but basically, for an example, the injection harness, which, you know, the bus has mechanical injectors, so the machine has a mechanical pump that as long as it turns, it's gonna move fuel into the combustion chamber, and it's gonna work. Well, with our truck, instead of having all mechanical, it basically brings pressure to the injector, and then the injector gets an electronic signal to open up and spray. Well, if it doesn't get that signal, then you're dead in the water, or you have a miss, which if you're trying to drive something heavy really is annoying. And unfortunately, in that truck, they're known for losing the harness that sends the signal for the fuel system. So, you know, on these, the mechanical diesels, they're pretty reliable. We're back to the list. So, window leaks, that's going to be somewhat hard to tell on a new, or on something that you're trying to buy. Typically it'll run down the frame rails or the ribs, and then just, you know, down under the floor. Sometimes if it's hefty enough, you'll see wet spots and leaks, but that can always be repaired. Wheels and rims, on ours, I was actually really surprised because basically the rust was working its way under the paint on the rims, and I thought that it'd probably have to get replaced, just, you know, to be on the safe side for DOT. But they said it was just fine, and as long as the flange where the bolts go through, as long as that's flat enough, you know, they don't really care, I guess. I guess that was just me being particular. But I'm trying to think what else. Oh, if you are able to, a lot of times with a school bus, you're not gonna have the chance, because most people probably don't have their CDL or a Skoolie, school bus driver endorsement. But if you can test drive it around a parking lot or a field or anything else, you know, just give it a little test drive. Make sure there's no grinding noises, no clunking noises. You know, if you have your shifter, keep your foot on the brake and shift from reverse to neutral to drive and back and forth a couple times. Just make sure there's no loud clunks. You know, sometimes you'll have them like ours. You know, the gearing in school buses, they don't get them really tight tolerances, so you'll hear a little bit. But if it sounds like, you know, a gunshot or something, then there's probably something wrong with it. Or if you shift it into gear and it just makes a grinding noise, or the transmission sounds odd, then, you know, be careful.
One thing I did want to mention that really caught our eye on this school bus too, while it was in the auction, was that it has a engine retarder on it. Mm-hmm. So we were really interested in that because we recently installed an exhaust brake on our truck, which has pretty much the same exact engine as this. And we love having the exhaust brake, especially whenever we're towing and everything. So something that really excited us about this was, isn't it a clam retarder or something like that? I think that's what it was technically called. But basically it slows the bus down for you without you having to put the brakes on. And that has been amazing. I mean, on the trip from Colorado out to Tennessee, if you're familiar with the area, there's a place called Monteagle. It's this huge grade that goes down, and it can be a little daunting sometimes, but I mean, he drove the bus out here and just put, you know, did the little...
Yeah, I didn't have to hardly touch my brakes at all. There was even a RV that pulled in front of me, not knowing what to expect, and then he started slamming on his brakes, and I was able to just, you know, put it up another notch on the retarder, and
yeah, and I mean,
it slowed down just fine.
It already has air brakes, so it's not like it's going to eat up the actual brakes themselves, but it just definitely saves your brakes a little bit better.
And if nothing else, it's nice to not have to be slamming on the brakes all the time. You know, in the bigger stuff, obviously not in fun to drive things, but in big stuff, you know, I like to go low and slow, just, you know, keep it low, keep it slow, and then if you see something on the road that is going to be in your way or going to be a problem, you know, react immediately, start slowing down, get it, you know, at least to a safe speed, and a retarder or an engine brake is the easiest way to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it works really good. I mean, usually by the second click, I mean, it has 4 clicks. Usually by the second one, it's like, you know, it really starts slowing down pretty good.
Yeah, we came to a dead stop traffic jam in...
It was Missouri.
Yeah,
it was
Kansas City.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was coming up over a hill, and then it swooped down into the left, like hard left turn. And that was the only time the entire trip I actually had to put it to the 4th notch. Because the rest of the time, you know, it slows down just fine itself in whatever. There's, you know, if that's an option, I would definitely go for it, especially if you're going to go in the mountains at all. You know, the brakes on these heat up really quickly, and, you know, runaway brakes on your house are not a good thing. So if you can find another way to slow down, absolutely look for that. But back to that test drive, if you can, you know, make sure obviously the retarder works if it has one, and find it before you have to drive it on city roads. Because you can use those in conjunction with brakes too, and in an emergency, you know, really makes this thing easy to stop. You can probably stop it in, you know, as much of a distance as you would a passenger vehicle, almost.